Hi everyone, welcome to the Stress Less for Exam Success webinar. My name is Sebastian. I am one of the student counselors at Imperial, and today, together with my colleague Libin, who's a study mentor, we will be discussing the levels of stress we might experience at different times, the impact it has on us on a physiological and mental health level, and then we will also focus on coping strategies and how we can improve our way of preparing for exams. So before we start, this webinar will be lasting for about an hour and it's composed of three parts. We will focus on the science and the psychology behind stress, then we will discuss some tips and encouragement to start your revision and exam prep, and then at the end you will have a chance to ask us a few questions, so we will have a Q&A, we encourage you to type some of these questions all throughout the webinar into our chat section. And then at the end, we would encourage you to take a few minutes to give us a bit of feedback in terms of what was good about the webinar, what do you feel you're taking out of it, and what would you like to hear more about next time, okay? So in the beginning, we will discuss a bit about what is stress. So stress can be understood as a state of tension that we generally experience when we're facing demands, constraints, or opportunities. It is a reaction or a behavior rather than an event itself, and generally what makes a difference when we're experiencing stress is your perception. Your perception will determine how you deal with the event. So in terms of the exam stress, if we want to be more specific, what does exam stress mean? Is an emotional, physiological, and behavioral response triggered by an imminent test or exam. So generally, when we experience stress, we will experience it on different levels. We will experience certain emotions related to stress, like anxiety, fear, tension, frustration. There's going to be some physiological responses as well, where you're noticing your body is becoming tense, your heart is beating quite fast. And then on the behavioral level, we will notice we tend to display certain types of behavior to manage these symptoms that we're experiencing. There has been quite a lot of research on stress, and generally I've tried to summarize some of them. So high levels of stress can interfere with attention and reduce working memory, leading to lower performance. So if we're experiencing high levels of stress and we don't know how to manage it, then this will have a negative impact on our attention, will generally reduce our working memory, which will mean we won't be able to perform to our full potential. Early experiences of anxiety and stress can also set a precedent for mental health problems in adulthood. What we notice is that stress can make you more vulnerable to illnesses and infections, and generally will affect your immune system, which means it will lower the ability of the immune system to fight viruses and infections and illnesses. Also, it can affect your sleep, which then in turn will affect your brain functions like memory, decision making, reasoning, and problem solving, which means your reaction time and alertness will lower as well. So what we've noticed throughout science and through research is that if you don't get a full proper sleep, this will affect in turn your next day. And we talk about basic skills as decision making, reasoning, and problem solving. And overall quality of life is affected if we're experiencing high levels of stress, which will mean our mood will be affected, our relationships, and generally our level of awareness. Now, I want to explain a bit about the stress response. Generally, what happens in the body when we experience certain stress levels. So a stressful situation like exam, deadlines, and worry will trigger physiological changes in the body, which means your muscles might tense, you're noticing an increased heart rate, and your breathing tends to be quite shallow. And this will lead to the fight, flight, freeze, or flop response. Generally, what I would want you to remember from this is that this is the body's way of protecting you from danger or perceived threat. So when there's a stressful situation, your body will experience some changes, and then generally you will notice you will go into fight, flight, freeze, or flop mode. To use an analogy to make this easier for you to understand, is imagine yourself as being this amazing, beautiful car like the one we have in the presentation here, and imagine your gas pedal as being the sympathetic nervous system. Generally, the sympathetic nervous system will trigger the fight or flight response, providing the body with a burst of energy. So what you're noticing is when you're becoming a bit stressed, a lot of times people mention noticing this wave of energy and this heat and their heart beating quite fast. So what happens in that moment is that your body is being pumped with cortisol and adrenaline, which are the stress hormones, giving you extra energy. Now, that would be a typical response if you are in a life-threatening situation, but an exam or a stressful situation at work or a conflict with someone does not constitute a situation where your life is at threat. Still, your body will not make the difference. So this is the gas pedal. Imagine the gas pedal, which is basically you will exacerbate the intensity of the symptoms you're experiencing. And then we talk about the brake pedal of a car, which is this parasympathetic nervous system. Generally, this aspect of our body promotes the rest and digest response, tends to calm the body down after the danger has passed. Now, there are three types of stress. There's a positive stress. To a certain degree, stress can be quite positive. It will help you develop coping skills, develop resilience. Also, will build up your immune system as well, according to the science. There's a tolerable type of stress, which is a temporary one and can be tolerated, particularly if people have developed resilience and if they feel supported by adult relationships. And there's a toxic type of stress, which I'm sure most of us know, where we're activating the stress response quite a lot, and then we don't feel like we're being protected or supported by others, or we don't have the proper coping strategies for it. I would like to explain a bit about the signs of chronic stress, and generally this could be divided in emotional symptoms, physical, behavioral, and cognitive symptoms. Emotional symptoms of chronic stress. You might notice you're becoming easily agitated, frustrated, or moody. There's a sense of overwhelmment, like you're losing control or the need to take control. We notice we're having difficulties relaxing, quieting our mind. Generally, people report noticing their mind is running into different types of directions, being overwhelmed with their thoughts, racing thoughts, and then this feeling bad about yourself feeling, which will lead generally to loneliness if it's quite prolonged, worthless, and sometimes even low mood and depression. If we talk about physical symptoms related to chronic stress, we notice there's a sense of low energy. People will mention a lot of times having headaches, an upset stomach, chest pain, and rapid heartbeat, generally aches and pains and tension in the muscles. This will also lead to insomnia at different times. We are also more susceptible to colds and infections because, as I mentioned in the beginning, according to the research, their chronic stress levels will affect our immune system's ability to fight some of these viruses. There can be sometimes a loss of sexual desire and nervousness, shaking, sometimes ringing in the ear, cold or sweaty hands and feet. If we talk about behavioral symptoms, there are changes in the appetite. So sometimes people might eat less or might eat too much to cope with the levels of stress they're experiencing. There's a tendency to procrastinate and avoid responsibilities, especially those responsibilities related to the stress event or the triggering event. There might be an increased use of alcohol, drugs, or cigarettes, and generally people tend to exhibit more nervous behavior, which will constitute in terms of nail biting, fidgeting, and pacing. Cognitive symptoms of stress or symptoms related to our brain functioning. Notice there's a constant worrying, which will generally lead to racing thoughts. A lot of times students mention they find it difficult to control their thoughts and they can't stop their brain from thinking over and over again about different situations. There's a sense of forgetfulness, some level of disorganization, which will lead to an inability to focus. and that generally leads to poor judgment. And while we notice this could be a vicious cycle, people generally tend to become a bit more pessimistic or only focusing on the negative side of things. So you might notice as you're preparing for your exam or for a deadline, you might notice you're constantly worried, will you finish on time? Will you be able to go through all the material? You have some racing thoughts, and generally you tend to forget. You find it difficult to focus as you're being in this constant stress response, and then you will probably have difficulty making decisions, and then becoming quite pessimistic towards the end, thinking, well, there's nothing you can do, and this is really difficult to cope with, and it's quite overwhelming. What I would like you to get from this part of this presentation related to stress and how it affects our body and our mental health is that stress is part of our day-to-day lives. It can be good because it will keep us alert, it will motivate us and mobilize us for action. Stress is controlled by the nervous system, and the purpose is to send signals or messages all over your body. So when you're experiencing stress, your body is trying to communicate with different parts to support you and to make sure is enabling you to face the stressful situations. Another good information about stress is that stress can trigger physical symptoms like headaches, skin irritation, muscle tightness, and it will have an impact on your mental performance. As we're approaching the end of this part of this presentation, I would like to leave you with this quote, which is one of my favorite quotes by William James, stating, "The greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another." Thank you for listening to this part of this presentation. I will now let my colleague Libin provide some tips on how you can improve your preparation for exams and for deadlines, and how you can manage stress better by organizing your material and different other aspects of it. And by the end of this webinar, we will encourage you to ask questions, as we will have a Q&A part. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sebastian, and hello to everybody listening. My name is Libin, and I am a study mentor here at Imperial. And in the second half of the presentation, I'll be sharing with you tips, techniques, and strategies for exam success. To begin, I'll be taking you on a journey towards studying. Some people sometimes think that studying is just a natural thing, it should just happen. It's not really the case for everybody though. And if you're here, maybe you're not really sure where to start from. And so this is where maybe this could be helpful to you. I'll be taking you on a journey, so please come on board and listen attentively. I'll be taking you, and please just imagine this, okay? What should you be doing a month before the exam? And I suggest that the priority a month before should all be about preparation and mindset. Then, getting closer to the time, 2 weeks before the exam, where I suggest that the focus area should be all about the studying and how to make that more efficient and effective. Then, again, getting closer to the time, a week before the exam. Here, I suggest that the focus area should be about reviewing what you've been studying. And then finally, the day before the exam, where really the main priority here should be all about reducing stress. And of course, the tips shared by Sebastian earlier could be applied here, and I actually really strongly encourage you to do so. So let's start the journey. A month before the exam, preparation. Plan and prioritize. There's this lovely quote here from Benjamin Franklin. By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. This is a really famous quote. You may have heard of it before, but it is so true. Success in your studies starts with a clear plan of what you need to do and how you're going to fit it all in. First things first. What do you actually need to do? What do you need to cover for your revision? I would like you to have a list of topics and subtopics and consider creating a simple tracking system so that you can see at a glance which topics need more work. This is what we call a traffic light system. For instance, you will be highlighting In red, all the topics that need work. In amber, those that you feel it's maybe 50-50 or you're getting there in terms of understanding and covering the content. And then green for those that you feel you've really understood and you've covered really well. Then once you've highlighted the different topics, ideally in terms of prioritization, you would need to start with the red topics. And then when you're done with them, move on to the amber and then keep the green for last. Once you've done this, this is how it could look. So as you can see, this person or this example, you've got all the topics. This could be in terms of the lectures, or it could just be in terms of the topics, or maybe it could be in terms of the modules that you're doing. And you can see all the reds that need to be prioritized. You can see all the amber or the yellow that could be second priority. And then you can see the greens that could be maybe last priority. Okay, this is very helpful if you're a visual person that needs to know how many things you need to go in depth with. Okay, and then compare that with how much time do you have. Okay, I'm going to show you a second way to also track your progression or to help you prioritize as well in the next slide. Okay, so this is a progress tracker system. And this example that you've got in front of you was actually made by one of the students that I work with. And I believe he was on the mechanical engineering course. So some of you may be familiar with these different modules that are listed on the top here. And this was for a preparation for his January exams, okay? So he's got here, as you can see, two tables, one of them titled Autumn Term Tutorial Sheets and the other one titled Autumn Term Lectures. And as you can see, horizontally, he listed all the different modules that he was taking that term. And as you can see for him, there was actually quite a few. Let me count quickly how many. 9, which is quite a lot. And as you can see vertically, the 1 to 10 refer to the number of weeks in the term, okay? And then what I had asked him to do, as you can see, was to put some colors in and to color code it. So to put in green everything that he had completed in terms of the problem sheets, but also in terms of the lectures. In blue, anything that was in progress. And in orange, anything that was incomplete. And then NA, not applicable for anything that wasn't really applicable because maybe it wasn't available at that time or it wasn't accessible or something like that, okay? So what you can see here is that this student was really good with keeping up with lectures because as you can see, it's pretty green. And there's a few reds and there's one blue and there's a few non-applicable as well. Okay, but overall, you can see that they've put a lot of effort with attending lectures and making notes on the lectures as well. By the way, when you see in this example, lectures didn't just mean attending the lecture, but also meant doing up and writing up the notes. In terms of the tutorial sheet, as you can see, it was a bit more of a work in progress. But as you can see though, this student was really trying to work equally amongst all the different modules that he was doing, which is a really good idea as well. You don't want to focus on only 1 or 2 out of 9. You want to give it equal share and attention amongst all of them. But as you can see, he was still working on it, okay? And as you can see, some of it, he's written partial, 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 and this is to do with in terms of revision. So he's completed the tutorial sheet, but then he was also using it as revision, and partial meant probably that he had only done part of it and not all of it. This is a system that I really, really, really like, and I try to encourage all of my students to put that in place. Again, it could sometimes be a shock to the system if everything is red or if there's little green, but you need to face the reality. If that's your reality, that's your reality, and you need to work with that. But you can't hope to prepare successfully for your studying if you're going to be hiding your eyes or you're going to pretend things are okay. All right, so be honest with yourself. And the earlier you do this, the earlier you can try to, to put something in place to turn those boxes into greens and blues, okay? Secondly, study routine. having a study routine is something I would like you to consider if it's not already in place. Behind every successful student is a great routine. Here are some points to consider when creating your routine. I need you to think about, when are your energy levels naturally highest? Do you work best in the first half of the morning? Or is it just before lunch? Is it in the late afternoon? This is very important for you to know so that you can take advantage of your biological prime time. Secondly, when creating your study routine, I need you to also keep in mind that it's important to leave time for you. If you're ambitious, and this probably has happened to you before, it's very tempting to cram as much as possible every single day, especially as you're leading up to the exam. However, that is not always the best of ideas. And then finally, if you've never had a study routine really in place before, it's very important that you start simple. Don't aim for gold on day one, okay? Set a routine that you can absolutely stick to, even on low energy or low motivation days, because those will happen, unfortunately. But you still need to show up. So be easy and kind to yourself, especially at the beginning. This is an example of a study routine that you could perhaps copy and implement for yourself. But please remember as you do that, and if you want to do that, that there is no one size fits all, and you may need to tweak things to fit around your schedule and your personal commitments. I'm not going to go through it. I'm going to give you a few seconds to quickly glance over this. What really should jump at you straight away should be the fact that there are, in this example, 2 study blocks of 2 hours each, one in the morning from 10 to 12, and then one in the early afternoon from 2 to 4. But also something interesting here, which I'll touch on towards the end of this webinar, is that in this example, there's also 2 half an hour, first thing in the morning and last thing in the day, where the student is retesting yesterday's new material, and then at the end of the day, retesting all the material covered in that day. You can also see that there are 2 breaks of 15 minutes each. Actually, one is 15 minutes, and then the one in the afternoon is half an hour. And you've got 2-hour lunch break to check emails, go for a walk, just breathe, take your eyes off the screen, and so on and so forth. I would say that this kind of a routine is pretty well balanced. Begins at 9, so 9 to 5. It's a typical work day. It's pretty good, especially if you've got several weeks before the start of your first exam. Of course, if you're more short on time, this may not be enough, or this may not feel like it's enough. And of course, maybe you could add maybe one more study block from perhaps 6 to 8, for instance, or something like that. But typically, this is what I would say is a balanced, healthy study routine. As you can see, there's no cramming, there's no staying up all night, but there's a balance here, which is what I hope that you can also achieve when creating your study routine. Once you've come up with a study routine that works for you, something very important is having consistency. Indeed, the key to studying effectively and pretty much everything else in your life is having consistency. Quick story here. Let's imagine 2 people want to get a book written. One person puts in half an hour every single morning to write a page or 2, and the other person doesn't. A year later, one person has a book and the other one doesn't. This example, very basic, can be applied to everything, including revising for exams. Imagine a person revises 2 hours a day and the other one doesn't. Guess what? Who feels better at the end of the day or at the end of the week, or feels more prepared nearer to the exam? Of course, it's the first person. So really consider having consistency in your studying. Decide on how many hours a day you want, how many hours a day do you want to put in? Again, I usually sometimes recommend students to choose a number, let's say 5 hours a day, even though I usually recommend starting with maybe 4 and then building up as you get closer to the exams. So let's say you want to start with 5 hours a day. It has to be 5 hours every day, ideally. Of course, you can take a day off. Of course, you can choose not to study on the weekend. Of course, you can do that. I'm talking about weekdays here, by the way, and I'm also talking about if you've got about a month or more before your first exam. Okay, you can afford to do that. Bottom line is you need to be consistent. It's not really going to cut it If you study for one day and take 2 days off, and then come back for the next day after that, and then take another 3 days off, you have to build that consistency. You have to get that momentum going. You have to build the rhythm, the rhythm, the rhythm, the rhythm. That's very important when studying. 2 weeks before the exam, so we're still on our journey. We're getting closer now. The focus area should be all about studying, but also how to have effective studying. I'll be sharing a few techniques here. Eat your elephant in tiny bites. Studying is a long game, and the big picture can sometimes be very big and scary indeed. So big that it feels like an elephant. So therefore, don't take everything on your shoulders at once. Break it down into small chunks with this very easy 3-step process. So let's imagine you've got 3 modules that you need to prepare ahead of your exam. One of these modules will represent this big elephant that's in front of you, okay? Let's say, for instance, you need to revise for this biology module, okay? Now, it feels really huge to approach this massive module / elephant at first. You may even feel paralyzed. You may feel panic. So what I need you to do is to think, how can you break it into sections, okay? So you could say, for instance, this particular module, well, it's got 4 sections. You already know that. Perhaps it's easy to tell through the lectures, or perhaps you can break it down yourself in a way that makes sense to you, okay? Then, once you've broken it down into 4 main areas, I need you to think again and to break down each one of these 4 sections further into more manageable bites, okay? So perhaps each section can be divided again into 5 subtopics or 5 subsections. I think you can see what I'm trying to get at here. So I want you to take whatever topic, whatever module that you will be examined on, and see how you can break it into a medium chunk, and then how you can break down that medium chunk into an even smaller chunk. And then what you'll eventually do is you'll revise the smaller chunks each day, 2 or 3 small chunks a day. And then what you'll end up having is, perhaps by the end of a week, you'll have the leg of the elephant covered. And then the following week, you'll have the head of the elephant covered. You're covering this huge topic portion by portion, angle by angle, not all at once, because that's overwhelming. Once you've done that, once you've broken down your elephant into tiny bites, then I just want you to start. The best thing to do is just to start with something, with one of the smaller chunks. Any. Sometimes it needs to be in particular order, sometimes it doesn't. I just need you to start. It's very easy, and I need to give a warning here. It's very easy to spend a long time breaking down the elephant and to try to make it pretty and to try to make it neat and to spend days, if not weeks, doing that process. That's a mistake, and that's an error that you shouldn't fall into. That's another way to say that procrastination alert, okay? So don't fall into that. Give yourself half a day. That's even very generous. Give yourself 2 hours to do that process for each one of your exams, and then crack on straight away, okay? Always remember that doing some revision, even if it's not the most effective or the most detailed, is better than having done none at all. Don't worry if at the beginning the work isn't good quality. Again, the importance is to just start and to get the rhythm going. Like I was saying earlier, it's all about building up the momentum and getting yourself engaged. Monotasking. It could be tempting when you are revising for several exams and you've got several things to cover to do a bit of everything all at once together in the same study session. I really do not recommend that. Monotasking is all about being disciplined, about giving your full attention to the task at hand, one task at a time. This is the best way to study effectively. It could be tempting to think that doing multitasking means getting more things done. So for example, maybe you are thinking you could revise 2 different chapters at once or 2 different modules at once, or to be revising and responding to emails at the same time, or watching this and then revising at the same time. Really not a good idea. When you are creating your study routine, as I showed you the example earlier, if you're choosing to have 2 study blocks, okay, Yes, sure. One study block could be one thing, and then the second study block could be a second thing. But what I don't want to see happen, hopefully, is within the same study block to cover more than one thing. Okay, again, there are slight nuances here because I know for some degrees, for instance, maybe medicine, I know sometimes you have to link in different topics together, and that makes more sense, and that's fine. I'm just talking in general, and of course, you all know the specificities of your courses, of your degrees, okay, but in general, it's not recommended, okay, because each time your concentration breaks or you switch to something else, you may lose valuable minutes, if not more, to find your focus again and to return your concentration on what you were trying to do. So keep that in mind. Take quality study breaks. This is important to keep in mind when creating your study routine or creating your study timetable. And be mindful here, we're not just saying take breaks or include breaks in your timetable or your revision schedule. We're saying take quality breaks. Depending on the intensity of your work and how long you can concentrate for, ideally every half an hour you should be trying to take a break. Again, I know some students find that more distracting, and that's fine. Maybe you can then take a break after every hour or every 45 minutes. I suppose essentially what's important is for you to find how long you can concentrate for and at what point do you lose your focus. Whenever you start to lose focus, this is a sign for you to take a quality break. Remember that studying is a marathon and it's not a sprint. It's not who can cram in the most hours. It's who can study the most effectively with the amount of time that they've got, okay? And having breaks is important. Now here you've got a few examples of what makes a break a quality break. And as you can see, none of these examples include being on your phone or just, staying or remaining on your seat or staying in the same position as you were. It is recommended for you to move around, to stretch, to maybe look outside a little bit, maybe get some fresh air, maybe drink some tea, do some light stretches, a few push-ups, something to just get your body moving, really. It's important because I'm assuming you're studying whilst sitting down. A lot of students report to me that, during study periods, they get backaches, neck pain as well sometimes comes up. So it's important to also, look after your body in this process. Essentially, anything that lets your mind rest and reset without being pulled into a new world of distraction would make it a quality break. Really what we're saying here is to try to avoid just being on your phone the whole break time, or to just avoid remaining exactly in the same position as you were while you were studying. Another technique again is the Pomodoro technique, and this is a famous one and you may have heard of it. The basic idea is to set a timer for, let's say, 30 minutes and work whilst it's counting down. Of course, that 30 minutes could be increased to 45, could be increased to 60 minutes. Really depends on how long you can concentrate for. And that will be different for every single person, okay? When the timer goes off, stop working and take a short break between 5 to 10 minutes. Then repeat with a longer break after 3 to 4 cycles of working. And I'll show you another better visual example in the next slide. People that like the Pomodoro technique appreciate the focus and motivation that comes with setting a ticking clock in the background. It's almost like you against the time. The time goes on and you need to be focused, you need to be on the work, your mind needs to be concentrating, right? People like that, and I actually find it really effective too. But they also like having that structure, the knowledge of, okay, it's going to be an intense 30 minutes and then I'm going to have 10 minutes to just breathe. So 30 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 10 minutes. Of course, again, please remember the window, you can edit that according to your own preferences. It could be 20 minutes, it could be 45, it could be an hour. You need to find that sweet spot for you. Here's another visual example of how this technique could apply. So as you can see in this example, we've got a set of 3 Pomodoros. So you've got the first Pomodoro, which is a study window. Again, the time will depend on you, but in this example, between 20 to 35 minutes, okay? Followed by a break of 5 to 10 minutes. Coming back again for a second window, a second Pomodoro, followed by a second break of about 10 minutes. Coming back for a third Pomodoro or third study window, And then after the third window, you take a longer break. Could be between 15 to half an hour. And that's a real quality break that I was talking about earlier, okay? This is a way that you can, even when you're creating your study routine that we mentioned a bit earlier, you could base it on something like this. You could decide, in my study day, I want to have 5 Pomodoros, okay? And each Pomodoro or each study window, it's going to be, let's say, 40 minutes, right? So 40 minutes, 40 minutes, 40 minutes, 40 minutes, 40 minutes. And of course, you've got the breaks in between each. That could be helpful. And you could even say, if you want to be a bit more detailed or to take it to the next step, you could even pre-decide, for these 2 Pomodoros, I'm going to cover this. For that Pomodoro, I'm going to dedicate it for maybe just in case I've missed a few things or a few questions or I need to research something. If you're the kind of person, I know this applies to some students, especially when you have to do online research or you've got to find papers to read or you've got to get some articles, they really get stuck in the loop of trying to keep finding more articles, more this, more that. This could be helpful. You could just give yourself, okay, I'm going to give myself 1 Pomodoro to get as many articles, relevant articles, and then that's it. And then for that day, I can't do any more because otherwise I'm going to be at it all day. And then maybe the second Pomodoro could be, okay, I'm going to try to read half of this article to begin with. You know what I mean? So you can really be creative with how you want to use this technique. I think it's a really fantastic technique for those people that maybe struggle to be effective or struggle to just get started. This forces you to start. As soon as you start the clock, you need to get started too. And the journey continues. We are now a week before the exam. Your priority should be about reviewing. In the next few slides, I'll be sharing a few helpful techniques. Please bear in mind that the techniques I'll be sharing from this point onwards take into account the fact that you probably have been studying, that you've probably covered the content or most of it, that you've probably attended the lectures and you've made the notes, okay? It's coming from that premise. This first technique is called the retrieval practice. The best learning happens when you're trying to recall information. This is the best way to study effectively. The moment where you're trying to pull a piece of information out of your memory is the magic moment in which your knowledge gets strengthened. This is a principle known as retrieval practice. Essentially, don't push the information in over and over and over by rereading, highlighting, or taking notes. This is good up to a point, okay? It might feel as though you are learning, but you'll quickly forget what you've studied. And this is why a lot of students, when you speak to them, they'll be really honest and say, you know what, I don't remember anything I studied last year. And this is mainly because what you were doing was just pushing in information just for the sake of the exam, just for the sake of, covering your bases, but it's not really information that you can recall if I was to ask you today, for instance, right? Obviously, that's fine, that works for a lot of students, but it's not ideal, okay? Especially for those students who are taking modules this term, but will only be assessed or examined, let's say, in the summer. That's not ideal. Okay. Focus on pulling information out of memory, and how will you do that? By testing yourself on what you know. Q&As, essentially. Retrieval practice. Test yourself to train your memory. Spend less time learning by pushing information in, rereading, standard notes, highlighting, just reading, and so on and so forth. Instead, spend more time testing yourself with retrieval practice, using flashcards or quiz apps, Q&A notes, tutorial sheets, problem sheets, practice papers, past papers. This is what you should really be focusing the week before or the days before your exam. Okay, really seeing how much information you've managed to understand and how can you pull it out of your mind, of your memory. Here's another visual to help really show how retrieval practice works. So you try to remember something that could be either by answering a question, could be on a Q&A, a quiz card, whatever, it doesn't really matter. But you try to remember something. There are 3 potential scenarios here. The first one, which is the ideal scenario, is you remembered accurately, and by the process of you trying to do that, your memory of that information gets stronger. So it's a plus plus. You try to remember something, but you've remembered inaccurately. This then highlights where you need to do more work, and it also helps you learn more next time. You have increased attention, and there will be more likelihood for you to remember this piece of information moving on in the future. So again, it's a plus plus. Third scenario is you try to remember something and you just didn't know. Again, this highlights to you where you need to do more work and also helps you learn better for next time. I suppose if you're doing the traffic light system, if you remember the red, orange, green that I mentioned at the very beginning, if you're not sure where you stand, maybe you could use retrieval practice to decide whether a topic is red, whether a topic is amber, or whether a topic is green, using retrieval practice. Okay, so you try to remember something, you remembered accurately, that means it's green. You remembered inaccurately, maybe it's amber, maybe it's red. You didn't know, that's definitely red, okay? So you could also use that technique if you're just not sure how to use a traffic light system. You could use the retrieval practice to decide what color each topic should be or needs to be. Moving on, here's another really helpful and excellent technique which I often recommend my students to also implement. And this is really the best way to build your memory. When you combine spacing with retrieval practice, you get what we call spaced retrieval practice. It's also called spaced repetition, which is, I think, the more familiar term. This means, essentially, you test yourself repeatedly on the topic at time intervals. When you start doing this, the real magic happens, the real memory magic happens. Spaced repetition or spaced retrieval practice, I think I'll just keep saying spaced repetition from now on, equals interrupting forgetting. You're literally stopping your brain from forgetting this piece of information. Your brain is lazy, everybody's brain is lazy, and naturally wants to forget information that is not important. However, each time you leave a time delay and then you try to do retrieval practice, you are sending a powerful signal to your brain that this piece of information is important and matters, and therefore your memory then stores it in a safe place and you remember it strongly, okay? Now, the key for this to happen, of course, is to build regular opportunities for spaced repetition to happen in your study routine. And I'll show you an example in the next slide. Spaced repetition is very, very powerful. Now, these are all examples of when you could incorporate spaced repetition. It doesn't have to be this way, but these are just examples of when you could incorporate it. For instance, you could do spaced repetition at the end of the session by asking yourself maybe Q&A questions or doing a flashcards on the topics that you've covered that day. And remember, the example that I showed you about the study routine, that particular example, you had half an hour at the beginning of the day to just review material, and then you had half an hour at the end of the day to also test yourself on the content that you had covered that day. This is an example of spaced repetition, okay? So at the end of the session, you can do it. You can also test yourself after taking a short break. So before you start a study block, a quick Q&A just to see if what you've just learned before is understood and clear in your mind. You could do it at the end of the day. You could do the morning after learning. You could do it a week later. You could do it every few weeks. You just need to find what is the sweet spot for you. And whatever that is, try to make it regular and consistent. Sometimes there's a student actually recently worked together, and I've recommended her, again, because she has got a lot of topics to cover. She's a medical student. I recommended to her that perhaps in her case, maybe after every 2 topics that you cover, then you introduce spaced repetition. Because in order to do spaced repetition, remember, you need to have accumulated a number of material. You need to have covered at least something, otherwise you can't really do spaced repetition. So for her, I suggested every 2 topics you start implementing spaced repetition on those 2 topics. But it doesn't mean you stop revising, you're still moving on to the next 2 topics, okay? Follow me along here. And then once you cover 4 topics, you're doing spaced repetition on 4 topics, and so on and so forth. In this way, the train and the momentum is still moving, so you're still progressing, and you are incorporating spaced repetition, so you're not forgetting what you've learned at the beginning of the week, at the beginning of the month, because you are testing yourself regularly. I hope that makes sense. The week before your exams, or really more generally during your revision preparation, or even just in general during your studying, it's very important for you to have boundaries, and it's important for you to be able to put some distance between yourself and distracting technology, which I know can be a huge problem for a lot of people. The internet is a great resource for studying, but distraction is also just one click away or one notification away. Here are some options that can work great at removing the distractions of notifications and social media. You could try, for instance, when you're having your 2-hour study blocks, to completely put your phone away if you don't need it. And that's probably what is the most recommended. And then, if you follow the 3 Pomodoro approach, you could, when you've got the longer break, which is up to half an hour, you could, if you wanted to, as you are moving around and hopefully getting some fresh air, yeah, sure, you can have a look at your phone. I mean, I know how hard it is to be away from your phone for a long extended period of time, and of course I don't want to make this more painful than it already is. So you can, but just, I suppose, don't fall into the trap of 5 minutes turning into 40 minutes, if you know what I mean. And that's very easy for that to happen. So be really rigid and strong with yourself. If you have low self-control, I mean, there are ways that you can be more strict with yourself. For instance, you could use a focus app which blocks out access to certain websites or social media. It can also help you with your time management. You could, if you wanted to, if it's a really huge problem for you to be focused, you could change your social media and Netflix passwords, for instance, write them down on a piece of paper and log out, and then you hide the piece of paper as far away as you can, or you give it to someone else. All of these are a bit extreme, I'm not going to lie. You don't have to go to that level, but if it's a real problem or real issue for you to focus and concentrate, and your phone on the table is a huge temptation, you need to do what you need to do. Again, you know yourself, or hopefully you should know yourself, or this is something you start to think about if you don't know what to do about that. There are ways around it, but really think about this. You need to banish distracting technology, and you need to think of ways to do that. Okay, so we are now approaching very, very closely the end of the journey. We are now the day before the exam, and really the focus here should be all about reducing stress. Very important, the night before the exam, but also really the nights leading up to the exams, sleep is very important. If you're getting fewer hours of sleep than you need, your brain function will suffer. And typically, adults need around 7 to 8 hours. Please note, and take this seriously, I suppose, without regular sleep, you will be less able to concentrate. You will be worse at paying attention. You will be less able to solve problems. You will be less creative, and you will be able to make less memories. So everything that we've been speaking about this morning, or this afternoon, if you are not sleeping enough, will be impacted by it and will be very difficult for you as well. So absolutely try not to be staying up all night. It's not really worth it. You may think in the moment that it's going to help, but most likely won't. If you're struggling with sleep, try to get into a sleep routine. Those things also exist. There's loads of examples on the internet. Try to create a fixed time after which you need to be in bed. Even if you're not falling asleep straight away, you need to be getting ready. You need to be calming things down around you and getting ready for rest. In the days leading up to your first exam, please keep walking, keep doing things that you would normally do. If you're somebody who's quite fit, somebody who enjoys exercising, I don't want you to take that away from your schedule. I want you to keep that going. It's important. It helps you, it boosts you, it helps you reset your focus. So if it's walking, swimming, running, cycling, or whatever else, keep doing what you're doing. Exercising is a huge way to reducing anxiety and stress, and it's very helpful to your body as well. So keep doing what you would normally do if it doesn't affect your studying. Also, keep talking. It is very, very easy and very, very common, unfortunately, for students to isolate themselves during the period before their exams. Don't neglect those around you, whether that's family or friends. Try to cultivate a support network among the people around you so that they are there when you need them. Also, if things are really difficult, if things are not really moving forward for you, or you feel like you're not really progressing, or you feel really unprepared despite trying really hard, get your struggles off your chest by talking about them to somebody who is maybe experienced in the field, or somebody who is your peer, or like an older sibling, or your parents, or somebody in your entourage that you trust. it helps because you are reducing the panic and the stress in that way. Talking helps. And obviously, just before exams, you need to have positive vibes. You need to think well. You need to be, in a good mindset, in a good headspace. So do what you need to do. For some people, they may not have people like that around them, and that happens. Well, you can still do journaling. You can record your thoughts. You can write it down. I suppose what I'm trying to say here is try to reduce the inner self-talk in a sense. Try to get those thoughts out of your system, out of your mind. Put on a piece of paper or talk to somebody. That can be helpful. Breathing and meditating, especially if you continue to feel anxious as the day of your exam approaches. Okay, meditation is a great way to remain present, to remain calm, and to reduce panic attacks as well. Finally, let's now recap. As we have now arrived at the end of the webinar and also at the end of the journey, I thought it could be helpful for me to share with you a recap, a visual recap of all the strategies and techniques that I described and shared with you throughout this webinar. And as you can see, they are separated into the 4 legs of the journey that we've taken together this afternoon. Remember, the first leg of the journey was all about preparation, roughly minimum 4 weeks before your first exam, ideally 10 weeks, okay? But again, that will be depending on every person's circumstances and when the first exam will be. But the first thing, regardless, needs to be about preparation. Remember the traffic light system that I spoke about. Remember the progress tracker table that I shared with you. Think and consider creating a study timetable or routine. Think about how many study blocks you should have within the day, or how many hours a day can you commit. And also think about how consistently can you commit to those hours or to that timetable or the routine you will have created. Remember that consistency is the key. Then we moved on to the second leg of the journey, which was all about studying and how to make your studying more effective. And I shared with you the picture of the elephant and how to eat your elephant in tiny bites, how to break things down into medium chunks, and then how to break the medium chunk into a smaller chunk. And then finally, how to approach your elephant in that way. I also urged you to just start. It doesn't have to be perfect at the beginning. You just need to create the momentum. You need to have the rhythm. You just need to start. It doesn't need to be perfect at the beginning and probably will not be perfect at the beginning. I suggested that you do monotasking instead of multitasking. I also explained to you what quality breaks mean and how important they are for you to reset and also regain some energy and concentration. I also explained the Pomodoro technique and how you can implement this into your study timetable and how effective it could be if you want to implement it. And I actually highly recommend this one. We then moved on to the third leg of the journey, and that was all about reviewing as you get closer to your exam date. And I shared with you the retrieval practice and how helpful that could be. I also shared with you the spaced repetition and how to implement that in your routine and how important it is to have some sort of spaced repetition happening at some point in your revision progression. Okay, it's very important. And I also shared with you some ways that you can help yourself to get rid of temptations on social media or to banish distractions in the form of technology. And then finally, the final step of the journey, or the final leg of the journey rather, was all about, the well-being, I suppose, the well-being preparation just before your first exam, because nerves will be around, there could be some anxiety remaining, there could be some stress. And so it's important to reduce that stress, to bring that down. And please remember all the tips given by Sebastian as well at the beginning of the webinar. And I specifically emphasize on the importance of getting enough sleep, not just the night before, but really the nights before approaching exam season. It's really important. Keep walking, keep talking, keep meditating, or start meditating if you don't do that. I know that meditation can seem very daunting or very scary sometimes to people who don't really know the practice. There's loads of guided meditation that you can find online. If you're spiritual, you could do some prayers. You can really connect with your spiritual side in this time of I don't know how you can call it, in this time of high stress, you could rely on, something bigger than you if you believe in that. And breathing, breathing control, breath control, very important, very helpful to just calm the nerves down. And that's something you can also apply during the exam, in the exam hall. If things become very stressful and you feel confused and you feel like you've forgotten everything, just really breathe, maybe close your eyes, really ground yourself and slow the pace down if you can. You can take a picture of this slide if you want. It could be helpful to you, and I hope it all makes sense to you. If not, please pop it in the question in the chat and we'll try to answer it if we have time. If you're still here, thank you so much for listening until the end. It is very much appreciated, and we really hope that this was beneficial and helpful to you. We are now going to move on to the Q&A. Please feel free to drop your question in the chat and like the questions that you want answered. The questions with the most likes will be answered first, but hopefully we have enough time to cover everything else. Thank you so much and good luck.